This is TWiT.
Kids, there was, before the internet, there was this thing called BBSs, bulletin board systems. and the best, you wouldn't even remember this, Alex. The best.
Oh, no, this is before my time.
Yeah, way before. The best of them was Fidonet. I ran a Fido BBS with not one but two phone lines in the mid '80s, and in fact, we were doing an early version of a global messaging system called EchoNet on top of Fidonet, where it was kind of a store and forward mail system, and it was really interesting, exciting times. And I like that hacker ethic, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and Fidonet's its killer app was that each Fidonet BBS would call other ones that were nearby and exchange messages with them.
That was EchoNet.
And program it for when the long distance rates were lowest and so on, and build it out. And I met Tom at a conference that my friend John Gilmore, who helped start EFF, was at, and John started the first BBS, or first ISP rather. It was a thing called the Little Garden in San Francisco.
Yes, I remember.
And his CTO is a guy called Tim Pozar, and Tim
Good
and
friend.
John, and Tim and John we're reminiscing about Fidonet with Tom, and about the day that they bridged Fidonet into Usenet. And they wrote a little software to bridge the two in. And I remember, because I was on a Fidonet bulletin board in Toronto as, a callow youth with an Amiga 1000. And I remember the day that the internet arrived on my local BBS, right? That suddenly Usenet had been imported holus bolus into my local BBS. And then listening to these three dudes just talk about writing the code to do it. It was really amazing. It was like eavesdropping on, God and his angels describing how they hung the stars in the firmament or something. It was really wild.
Tim was the chief engineer of the radio station I was working at. He introduced me to Tom, and the rest is history. And wow. Yeah. So there's a full circle story.
Can I just throw in one thing here, because I'm a little bit younger, and so my first internet experience was dial-up on Windows 95, more or less. Maybe it's 98. I feel like I missed something very interesting. Just listening to you guys talk this through, and when the technology world was seems to be smaller and more nascent,
Yes,
now people
and more
are
hobbyist, more do it yourself kind of.
Now the kids are doing NFTs, and it doesn't seem to have the same ethos to it.
Tom has this incredible story he tells about these arguments that used to happen on Fidonet all the time. And the way that the shape of the argument was that someone would say, "How dare you come into my living room and talk to me that way?" And he would have to cool people out. It was before Bill Gibson coined the term cyberspace, right? And he would just have to explain that, although the conversation is happening in your living room for you, the person who's having that conversation with you is not in your living room. You just need to think back to norms. You need to rethink your normative framework for this discussion that we're having.
I'm just looking through. Somebody has published. I guess there's still Fido locations around. This is the Fidonet node list.
Which, that's great.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Most of these units are down, but a surprising number are still around.
When the apocalypse comes, this is going to be the internet, by the way. That you just saw right there. That's going to be what we have left.
Those might be the last landlines still in use.
I'm sure somebody has created a back end. In fact, it looks like there is a back end of the internet, so that some of these don't have phone number. A lot of these don't have phone numbers, but some do. Some do.
I've often thought about creating a video game that would be 80s hacker. It would bring back those Haze commands and the way.
Yeah.
The way you had to sign on to bulletin boards and download things back in the 80s.
I was waxing nostalgic about my early coding days. Back when I had Fidonet, it was so hard to get in with only two phone lines. I wrote a daemon dialer for the Macintosh, because it was a Macintosh board, Mac-Q, 85, 86, early days of Mac. I wrote a daemon dialer, and I'm still convinced it was the first multitasking program ever written for the Mac. I used the vertical blank interval when the electron gun goes from the bottom to the top of the screen to start drawing it again. There's a brief few milliseconds that the computer can't do anything, that you can grab and say, stuff the ATDT command into the modem, one character at a time. So it would stuff the command in, it stuff the phone number in, and then it would stuff the dial command. And then every vertical blank, 60 times a second, would check to see if it was a busy signal or if it was ringing. And there was a Hayes command for I got through. And then it would make a big when it got through. It was called Q dial. It was purpose built. It would only dial my BBS. But
what's a Hayes command?
Never mind. Forget. So let's talk about the framework laptop. This poor kid here, he never heard of a.
Guys, I'm 32. Like, I know that I'm the young person on the show, but like, I'm not exactly 17. Like, I'm not cool either. And I'm just saying, like, this stuff sounds awesome. I'm not even trying to be pejorative. Like, I'm curious about what I missed.
These commands were. It's a great story, right? It was a proprietary command set to control modems that then became a de facto standard. And there was saber rattling, stop making modems that are compatible with my command set, and so on. It was one of those early fights that looks a lot like some of the fights we've had since about whether, like, I mean, I think if you follow the Oracle API lawsuit, the Hayes command set story would seem pretty familiar to you.
Yeah, no kidding. What goes around comes around. You're not that old, though, Cory. I'm surprised you remember all this
I'm
stuff.
51, almost. 50 and a half.
You must have been a mere child when all this.
So my dad was a computer scientist who brought home a teletype in 1977 with an acoustic coupler.
There you go.
And so, that was my first dial-up was PDPs, and it was basic interpreters, ELIZA, and a chat program with the 7 other people who could dial into that mainframe.
Did you ever play Colossal Cave?
Sure, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I spent hours.
I did all the nostalgia computing.
Yeah, you have to put the handset in the rubber suction cup. And then if anybody picks up the phone while you're in the Colossal Cave, Mom, get off the phone!
I'm sorry, acoustic coupler sounds like science fiction. Are you telling me this is actually backwards technology? That sounds awesome.
Yeah, you had to. So you know how when you get on your modem, it goes, and then it goes, then it turns off because you don't want to hear. That actually is analog sound that can be translated into ones and zeros. That's how phone lines send data. An acoustic coupler worked with your standard telephone. Here's one. And you would take
it had a mic and a speaker.
Yeah.
And you just hung the phone up in it.
So
That's
this is
the
a
coolest thing
modem.
I've ever seen.
It would turn the sound into and it would send it down the phone line as sound. So if you listened, that's what you'd hear.
I'm in awe of how cool this. That's like that feels very DIY hackerish, like in that cool in a
that was
retro kind of cool way.
Back then. Yeah, no, that's all it was. For me, I'm a little younger than Leo and Cory, but I saw Wargames and I'm like, I want to know how to do all of this. Like I had to learn that instantly. So I got my parents to go get me acoustic couplers were out by that time. It was like a 2400 baud modem that you would plug in, but like writing a program to go through and like auto dial BBSs. And there was no security back then, none. If you just hit the jackpot, it would be something so
I had all sorts of stuff on there, man.
It was great.
So I'm going to pull a Cory here. This goes back to the Carterphone decision. Because
I was just going to say, this is Carterphone. You and I are on the same wavelength here.
I'll bite. What's that?
I'll let Cory explain.
So in the old days, so this is actually really relevant to the discussions we have about things like Facebook today, about whether we should like break them up or just try and make them behave themselves. So for 68 years, the FTC and the DOJ tried to break up AT&T, and AT&T kept getting these new leases on life by offering to try and solve the problems they created. So they would like do universal service to make up for all the co-ops and small businesses that they put out of business with predatory conduct. And one of the things that would happen is every time they would become more central to safety and security is they would get more power to control their competitors. And one of the things they got was the right to decide who could plug things into the Bell system. So the first layer of this was they had the right to control mechanical coupling to the Bell system, and they went after a company that sold It was called Hushaphone, and they sold these cups that went over the receiver of your phone so that you could talk into them like this, and people couldn't read your lips or hear you. And they argued that by making a plastic cup that fit over your phone, you were endangering the Bell system and thus America's public safety and security apparatus. They lost that case, but they retained the right to control electric coupling to the system until Carterphone came along. And Carterphone was a gadget for ranch hands. And what it would let you do is plug a walkie-talkie into your phone with an acoustic coupler. And when your phone rang, it would transmit it to a walkie-talkie on your belt when you were out in the barn or out on the range. And they argued that the electric coupling of the, because there was a way to detect that it was ringing and take it off hook, that the electric coupling was itself another danger to the system. And once again, the courts told them to go to buzz off. And that opened the door for modems, answering machines, PBXs, just like all kinds of things that we plug in. The Sports Illustrated complimentary football-shaped phone, all of those things, because prior to that, their subsidiary Western Digital was the only company able to make phones, and they were able to do all kinds of really abusive things. Like you couldn't buy a phone. You could only lease it. And then over the course of your lease, you might pay for that phone 100 times. And as late as the 2010, there were still customers, like old people, who were still leasing a Western Digital phone that they'd had for 60 years and paying like $10 a month to lease a phone whose retail value at that point was less than $1, you know, and they were still making money on this. So yeah, Carterphone was this turning point that ended all kinds of predatory scams that were endemic to having a regulated monopoly instead of, breaking it up and making it weaker so that other firms can compete with it.
It was actually broken up in 84, I think, right?
82.
82. So right before I set up
years.
that BBS, yeah.
Well, I mean, that's where
wouldn't have been able to do a BBS without it.
Well, yeah. So Fidonet wouldn't have existed if they hadn't broken up the bells and made them have long distance competition.
Yep.
Right, because it was long distance competition that made Fidonet possible.
Here's something none of you remember. Maybe you will, Corey. You might be old enough. You get on a long distance call and you go, "I gotta make this quick. It's costing a lot of money."
100%.
Nowadays, you can call around the world for nothing.